The phone rang at 6:47 p.m., sharp and shrill, cutting through the quiet hum of crickets outside my kitchen window. I was halfway through slicing carrots for stew, the knife pausing mid-chop as the sound jolted me. My old rotary phone, a relic from my dad's era, hung on the wall, its faded yellow plastic glowing faintly under the fluorescent light. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, the rough cotton catching on my calloused fingers, and picked up the receiver. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, but it sent a prickle down my spine. I hadn't called 911. Not tonight. Not ever. In fact, since I moved to Willow Creek 5 years ago. Before I could speak, a woman's voice exploded through the line, loud enough that I had to pull the phone an inch from my ear. Yes, I need the police immediately. There's a man squatting on land that belongs to my daughter's trust. He's refusing to leave, and he's intimidating the entire neighborhood. Her tone was sharp, dripping with entitlement, like she was scolding a waiter for a cold steak. I froze, the knife still in my other hand, my pulse ticking up. Squatting? Intimidating? I knew exactly who this was. Margaret Hensley. She was standing somewhere close enough for her call to patch through to my line by some fluke of the old phone system. I could picture her now, pacing the gravel road outside my gate, her designer sunglasses perched on her nose, phone glued to her ear. I set the knife down, slow and deliberate, and stepped to the window. The curtains were parted just enough to see the road. There she was, 50 yards out, silhouetted against the fading pink of the sunset. Margaret, in a crisp white blazer and heels that had no business on a dirt road, gesturing wildly as she spoke. Her voice carried through the receiver, each word a jab. He's got no right to that property. My daughter's foundation is set to build a community center there. We're with the HOA, and this trespasser needs to be removed. Trespasser. The word hit like a punch to the gut. My name is Tom Brennan, and I've owned this homestead for 5 years, bought fair and square with every penny of my firefighter's pension. Before that, it belonged to my parents, and before them, my grandparents. Willow Creek, a sleepy stretch of farmland just outside Boise, Idaho, was my family's roots, sunk deep into the soil of these 40 acres. I'd been born in the very house I stood in now, a sturdy 2-story with cedar siding and a wraparound porch that creaked under my boots. And now Margaret Hensley, who'd moved here 6 months ago with her 25-year-old daughter, Elise, was calling me a trespasser on my own land. I didn't say a word. Not yet. I just listened, my jaw tight, as she ranted to the dispatcher. My dog, Rusty, a wiry mutt with one floppy ear, sensed my tension and patted over, nudging my leg with his nose. His low whine matched the growl building in my chest. Outside, Margaret's voice grew louder, like she wanted the whole valley to hear. He's got that vicious dog, too. It's a menace. I'm telling you, officer, this man is a danger to our community. Vicious? Rusty, who once carried a baby rabbit in his mouth for a mile to drop it safely at my feet. I almost laughed, but the sound stuck in my throat. Margaret wasn't just making a scene. She was building a case. I could hear it in the way she layered her lies, each one thicker than the last. Her daughter, Elise, was nowhere in sight, but I knew she was part of this. Elise, with her polished smile and her nonprofit that seemed to exist only on glossy flyers, had been eyeing my land since the day they arrived. They wanted it for some eco-friendly community center, or so they claimed. I didn't buy it. Not for a second. I hung up the phone, cutting off Margaret's tirade mid-sentence. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor throwing a tantrum. This was a calculated move, and I'd seen enough fires in my career to know how fast a spark could turn into an inferno. I crossed the kitchen, my boots thumping on the worn oak floor, and pushed open the screen door. The evening air was cool, scented with alfalfa and the faint tang of wood smoke from a distant burn pile. Rusty followed, his nails clicking softly, his ears perked for trouble. Margaret didn't see me at first. She was too busy pacing, her heels kicking up dust as she barked into her phone. Yes, officer, please hurry. We've got plans for that land, and this man is standing in the way of progress. Progress. That word again. She'd used it the first time we met, when she'd knocked on my door with a clipboard and a fake smile, asking me to consider selling my land to her daughter's foundation. I told her politely but firmly that Willow Creek wasn't for sale. Not now, not ever. She'd left that day with a tight-lipped nod, but I'd seen the glint in her eyes. It wasn't defeat. It was strategy. Now, as I stepped onto the porch, my shadow stretched long across the gravel. Margaret froze mid-step, her phone still pressed to her ear. Our eyes locked, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or fear. But it vanished as fast as it came, replaced by that same smug certainty she always wore. "There he is," she shouted into the phone, pointing at me like I was a fugitive. "That's him. The squatter." I didn't move, didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, arms crossed, my flannel shirt still dusted with flour from the stew I'd been prepping. Rusty sat beside me, his tail low but steady, his brown eyes fixed on Margaret. "You're on my property, Margaret," I said, my voice calm but hard as steel. "And you're making a fool of yourself." Her lips curled into a sneer. "Your property? We'll see about that, Mr. Brennan. The HOA has authority here, and my daughter's trust has every right to that land. You're the one who's going to be sorry." She snapped her phone shut, the sound sharp in the quiet evening, and turned on her heel, stalking back toward her sleek black SUV parked just beyond my gate. The tires crunched as she peeled out, leaving a cloud of dust that hung in the air like a bad omen. I stood there a minute longer, watching her taillights disappear down the road. The crickets started up again, their chirps filling the silence, but my mind was anything but quiet. Margaret wasn't bluffing. That 911 call was just the opening shot in a war I hadn't asked for. I'd spent 25 years putting out fires, running into burning buildings while others ran out. I knew how to handle heat. But this was different. This was personal. Back inside, I locked the door and checked the windows, an old habit from my days on the job. Rusty curled up by the hearth, his eyes still tracking me as I paced the kitchen. The stew sat untouched on the counter, the carrots half-sliced, the pot cold. I didn't have an appetite anymore. Instead, I pulled a beer from the fridge, popped the cap, and sat at the oak table my dad had built when I was a kid. The wood was scarred from years of use. Knife marks, coffee rings, the faint outline of my sister's initials carved when she was 10. This house, this land, wasn't just a place. It was my history. My family's blood was in the beams, the fields, the creek that ran through the back pasture. And Margaret Hensley thought she could take it with a phone call and a laminated HOA badge. I took a long pull from the beer, the cold biting my throat, and let my mind settle. I'd dealt with bullies before, arrogant chiefs, drunk brawlers at accident scenes, even a mayor who tried to cut our station's budget to fund his pet projects. But Margaret was a new breed. She wasn't just loud or pushy. She was relentless, armed with money, connections, and a daughter who played the part of an idealistic do-gooder. Elise hadn't been at the gate tonight, but I knew she was pulling strings behind the scenes. I'd seen her at the county fair last month, handing out flyers for her Willow Future Foundation, all smiles and promises of green energy and community gardens. The locals ate it up, but I'd noticed the fine print on those flyers, vague mentions of land acquisition and redevelopment. My land. The worst part? I wasn't sure who was backing them. Margaret had moved into the big new house on the hill, a glass and steel monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a city, not a farming community. Rumor was she'd been a corporate lawyer in Seattle before retiring to Willow Creek. Elise, meanwhile, had a degree from some fancy East Coast college and a knack for charming anyone who'd listen. Together, they were a machine, Margaret with the threats, Elise with the polish. And I was just one man, 52 years old, with a bad knee from a collapsed roof and a dog who'd rather chase squirrels than fight. But I wasn't alone. Not entirely. I had my cousin, Nate, who ran the feed store in town and knew every farmer in the county. I had Mrs. Callahan, the 80-year-old widow next door who'd baked me casseroles when I first moved back. And I had the truth, deeds, tax records, a surveyor's map from 1963 that showed every inch of Willow Creek in my family's name. Margaret could scream all she wanted. She wasn't getting this land. Still, as I drained the last of my beer, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Margaret's 911 call wasn't a tantrum. It was a declaration of war. And wars, I knew, weren't won by standing still. I pushed back from the table, the chair scraping the floor, and grabbed my jacket. Rusty's ears perked up as I opened the door. "Come on, boy," I said. "Let's check the fence line." The night was clear, the stars sharp against a black sky. I walked the perimeter of the homestead, my flashlight cutting through the dark, Rusty trotting at my heels. The fence was solid, barbed wire and cedar posts, built by my dad when I was a kid. But as I reached the back pasture, near the creek, my beam caught something odd. A section of wire was cut, the ends curled back like someone had used bolt cutters. Footprints, fresh and deep, led toward the water. Not mine. Not Rusty's. Someone had been here, and they weren't just passing through. I crouched, my knee creaking, and studied the tracks. Men's boots, size 10, maybe 11. The tread was heavy, like work boots, not the fancy sneakers Elise's city friends wore. Rusty sniffed the ground, his hackles up, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Easy, boy, I whispered, but my own pulse was hammering. This wasn't random. This was Margaret's next move. I straightened, my flashlight sweeping the field. The creek babbled softly, its banks hidden by tall grass. Whoever did this was gone, but they'd be back. I knew it. And when they came, I'd be ready. I turned back toward the house, Rusty at my side, my mind already mapping out the fight ahead. Margaret wanted a war? She'd get one. But she was about to learn something about firefighters. We don't just fight flames. We fight for what's ours. The next morning, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. I woke before dawn, my sleep fractured by dreams of smoke and sirens, old ghosts from my firefighting days. Rusty was already at the door, whining softly, his nose pressed to the gap. I pulled on my boots, the leather creased from years of wear, and grabbed my flashlight. The cut fence from last night gnawed at my mind like a splinter. Whoever did it wasn't just vandals. They were testing me. Outside, the sky was still gray, the stars fading into a thin mist that clung to the fields. I followed the fence line again, Rusty trotting ahead, his ears twitching at every rustle in the grass. The cut section was worse than I'd thought. Not just one strand of wire, but three, sliced clean through, the ends twisted back to make a gap wide enough for a man to slip through. The footprints were still there, now smudged by dew, leading toward the creek. I followed them, my boots sinking into the soft soil, until I reached the water's edge. The creek was low this time of year, its surface glinting like polished glass. But something was wrong. A faint sheen floated on the water, oily and unnatural, catching the first light of dawn. I knelt, dipping my fingers into the stream. They came up slick, smelling faintly of gasoline. My stomach twisted. This wasn't an accident. Someone had poured fuel into my creek, my water source for the garden, the livestock, the house. Rusty growled, his hackles up, staring into the tall grass on the other side. Stay, I told him, my voice low. I waded across, the cold biting through my jeans, and scanned the bank. There, half hidden in the weeds, was a red plastic gas can, its cap loose, a few drops still leaking into the dirt. The same kind I'd seen in the back of Margaret's SUV last week when she'd parked too close to my gate. I didn't touch it. Evidence, I thought, my old training kicking in. I pulled out my phone, snapped photos, and marked the spot with a stick. My hands were steady, but inside, I was burning. Margaret wasn't just making noise now. She was poisoning my land. I headed back to the house, Rusty at my heels, my mind racing. I needed to report this, but I also needed to be smart. Margaret was a lawyer, or had been. She'd know how to cover her tracks, how to twist the truth. I couldn't just call the sheriff and expect them to haul her in. I needed proof, and I needed allies. Back at the house, I brewed coffee, the pot hissing as I dialed Nate. My cousin picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy but warm. Tom, you okay? It's barely 6. I told him about the 911 call, the cut fence, the gas in the creek. His silence was heavy, the kind that comes when someone's weighing bad news. That's not just harassment, he said finally. That's a crime. You need to get the sheriff out there, but you also need to watch your back. Margaret's got friends in high places. Word is she's been cozying up to County Commissioner Daniels. Daniels. The name hit like a brick. Paul Daniels was a slick politician who'd pushed for rezoning farmland into subdivisions, pocketing campaign funds from developers. If Margaret had him in her corner, this wasn't just a neighbor dispute. It was a land grab. What do I do, Nate? I asked, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. You document everything, he said. And you come by the store today. I'll round up some folks who've had run-ins with her. You're not fighting this alone. I hung up, my coffee untouched, and checked the security cameras I'd installed last year after a coyote got into the chicken coop. The system was basic for cameras covering the house, barn, gate, and back pasture, but it was wired to a hard drive in the attic. I pulled up the footage from last night. At 2:13 a.m., a figure appeared near the creek, moving fast, head down, wearing a dark jacket and boots. The gas can was clear in their hand, glinting under the moonlight. The face was hidden, but the limp was unmistakable. Elise's boyfriend, Ryan, a wiry guy who'd been hanging around Margaret's house. I'd seen him at the fair, handing out Elise's flyers, his smirk sharp enough to cut glass. I saved the clip, burned it to a USB, and called the sheriff's office. Deputy Carla Ruiz answered, her voice clipped but familiar. She'd been a rookie cop when I was still on the fire crew, always first to the scene with a thermos of coffee for the team. Tom, what's going on? I laid it out, the 911 call, the fence, the creek, the footage. She didn't interrupt, but I could hear her pen scratching. I'll be out in an hour, she said. Don't touch that gas can. And Tom? Stay calm. I know Margaret. She's slippery. While I waited, I walked the property again, checking for more damage. The garden was fine, the chickens clucking happily in their coop. But in the barn, I found something new. A stack of hay bales pushed over, the twine cut, straw scattered like confetti. It wasn't random. Someone had been here, sending a message. I took more photos, my anger simmering into something colder, sharper. This was my home. My parents had danced in this barn at their wedding. My dad had taught me to drive a tractor here. And now Margaret and her crew were treating it like a pawn in their game. Carla arrived at 7:45, her cruiser kicking up dust as she pulled through the gate. She was in her late 30s, stocky, with a no-nonsense braid and eyes that missed nothing. Rusty wagged his tail but stayed back as she stepped out, her radio crackling. Show me, she said, skipping the small talk. I led her to the creek, pointed out the gas can, the sheen on the water. She crouched, sniffed the air, and shook her head. This is bad, Tom. Environmental hazard. I'll get the county health department out here to test the water. But you said you've got footage? I nodded, handing her the USB. It's Ryan, Elise's boyfriend. You'll see the limp. Carla's brow furrowed. Elise Hensley? Margaret's kid. She sighed, tucking the drive into her pocket. This is gonna get messy. Margaret's been lobbying the county for months, saying her daughter's foundation is the future of Willow Creek. She's got Daniels wrapped around her finger, and half the HOA thinks she's a saint. What about the other half? I asked, leaning against the fence. Carla smirked, just a flicker. They're scared of her. She's got a knack for digging up dirt, parking tickets, late taxes, anything to twist arms. But you? You're clean. And this land's been in your family forever. That counts for something. She paused, her eyes softening. You sure you want to take her on? She doesn't quit. Neither do I said, my voice steady. Carla nodded, like she'd expected that. All right. I'll file the report, get the footage to the DA. But you need to lock this place down. Cameras, lights, maybe a few no trespassing signs. And talk to Nate. He knows who's on your side. She left, promising to follow up. But as her cruiser disappeared, I felt the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. Margaret wasn't just a bully. She was a predator, and I was her prey. But I'd faced worse than her fires that chewed through entire blocks, nights where I carried kids out of burning houses while the roof groaned above me. I wasn't backing down. I spent the rest of the morning at Nate's feed store, a squat brick building on the edge of town. The place smelled of grain and leather, its shelves stacked with everything from horse feed to fence posts. Nate was behind the counter, his flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, his beard flecked with gray. He hugged me hard, like he always did, and poured me a coffee from the pot he kept for customers. You look like hell, he said, grinning. Thanks, I muttered, taking the mug. You hear about Margaret's stunt? He nodded, his grin fading. Whole town's buzzing. She's telling everyone you're holding up her daughter's big plan. Says you're some loner hoarding land that could benefit the community. But I've got your back. So do a few others. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Mrs. Callahan's been talking. Says Margaret tried to fine her for her rose bushes last month. And Tim Lopez, the mechanic? She threatened to report his shop for code violations unless he joined the HOA. People are fed up. Fed up enough to help? I asked. Nate shrugged. Some. But they're scared. Margaret's got money, and she's not afraid to use it. You need to play this smart, Tom. Get your ducks in a row, deeds, surveys, everything. And maybe call that reporter, Jenny Klein. She's been sniffing around for a story on the HOA. Jenny. I hadn't thought of her. She was a local journalist, mid-30s, with a knack for digging up dirt on corrupt officials. I'd met her once at a town hall, when she grilled Daniels about a shady road contract. If anyone could shine a light on Margaret's schemes, it was her. Good call, I said. I'll reach out. Before I left, Nate handed me a stack of no trespassing signs and a roll of barbed wire. "Put these up today," he said, "and keep Rusty close. If Margaret's sending Ryan to mess with your creek, she's not playing games." I nodded, my jaw tight. As I drove back to Willow Creek, the signs rattling in the bed of my truck, I felt the first stirrings of a plan. Margaret wanted a fight? I'd give her one. But I'd do it my way, steady, legal, and relentless. By noon, the sun was high, baking the fields in a golden haze. I spent the morning reinforcing the fence, hammering new posts into the ground and stringing barbed wire until my hands ached. Rusty lay in the shade of the barn, watching me work, his tongue lolling in the heat. The no trespassing signs went up every 50 feet, their red letters stark against the weathered wood. I didn't know if they'd stop Margaret, but they'd make it clear this was my land, and I wasn't budging. Back inside, I pulled the deed from the safe in my dad's old study. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but legible, signed by my grandfather in 1947. It listed every acre of Willow Creek, along with a notarized exemption from the HOA, filed when the association formed in the 80s. My parents had fought to keep the land free from their rules, and I wasn't about to let that legacy crumble. I made copies, tucked the original back in the safe, and emailed Jenny Klein. My message was short: Margaret Hensley's trying to steal my land. I've got proof. Interested? Within 10 minutes, she replied. Hell yes. Meet me at the diner tomorrow, 9 a.m. I felt a flicker of hope, but it was short-lived. As I stepped onto the porch, my phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Callahan. Check your mailbox. Something's off. My gut clenched. The mailbox was a quarter-mile down the road, a rusted metal box on a post that leaned slightly from years of wind. I grabbed Rusty and my flashlight, though it was still daylight, and jogged to the road. The box was ajar, the flag down. Inside was a single envelope, no stamp, no address, just my name scrawled in sharp black ink, Tom Brennan. I tore it open, my fingers clumsy. Inside was a typed letter, the kind you'd see from a lawyer's office, but unsigned. Notice of intent to review property compliance. The Willow Creek HOA has received complaints regarding unpermitted structures and environmental violations on your property. A hearing is scheduled for next Friday. Failure to comply may result in fines or legal action. My blood ran cold. Environmental violations? That was rich, coming from the woman whose lackey dumped gas in my creek. The unpermitted structures were nonsense. My barn and house had been here decades before the HOA existed. This was a scare tactic, pure and simple. I stuffed the letter in my pocket and scanned the road. No cars, no tracks, but the hairs on my neck stood up. Someone had walked here, dropped this off, and vanished. Rusty sniffed the ground, his tail stiff, and let out a sharp bark. "What is it, boy?" I followed his gaze to a patch of dirt near the mailbox. A cigarette, but still fresh, its filter stained with lipstick. Margaret didn't smoke, but Elise did. I'd seen her at the fair, puffing away behind the cotton candy stand, her eyes darting like she was hiding something. I bagged the butt in a Ziploc from my truck. More evidence. That afternoon, I drove to the county health department to report the creek contamination. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Linda, took my statement and promised to send an inspector. This could take a few days, she warned. We're backed up. I nodded, but my patience was thinning. Back at the house, I checked the cameras again. Nothing new, but the footage of Ryan kept looping in my mind. His limp, the gas can, the way he'd glanced back like he knew he was being watched. I burned another copy of the clip and locked it in the safe. By evening, I was restless, the letter from the HOA burning a hole in my pocket. I called Mrs. Callahan. Her voice was shaky but firm. "Tom, that woman's been sniffing around my place, too. Yesterday, she left a note saying my roses were non-compliant. I've lived here 60 years, and no one's ever complained about my damn roses." I could hear the defiance in her voice, and it steadied me. "You keep that note," I said. "We're building a case." She paused, then added, "Be careful, Tom. She's not just mean. She's dangerous." I hung up, my mind spinning. Dangerous. I'd faced danger before, flames that roared like freight trains, smoke so thick you couldn't see your own hands. But Margaret was a different kind of threat. She didn't just want my land. She wanted to erase me, to rewrite Willow Creek's history to fit her vision. I wasn't just fighting for my home. I was fighting for my family's name. That night, I sat on the porch with Rusty, a shotgun across my lap. Not loaded, not yet, but a reminder I wasn't helpless. The stars were bright, the air cool, but sleep wouldn't come. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A motion alert from the barn camera. I pulled up the feed, my heart thudding. A figure, hooded, was slipping through the gap in the fence, a flashlight beam dancing across the hay bales. Not Ryan this time. Taller, broader. I grabbed the shotgun, loaded it, and stepped into the dark, Rusty at my side. Whoever they were, they'd picked the wrong night. The night was still, the only sound the crunch of my boots on gravel and Rusty's low growl. The barn loomed ahead, its silhouette sharp against the starlit sky. My flashlight was off. I didn't want to give myself away. The camera feed had shown the figure moving toward the hay bales, their flashlight flickering like a firefly. I gripped the shotgun, its weight familiar from years of hunting with my dad, and crept along the fence line, staying low. Rusty's ears were pinned back, his body tense, ready to bolt if I gave the word. I reached the barn's corner and peered around. The figure was still there, crouched near the back wall, their flashlight beam focused on something in the dirt. They were digging, the soft scrape of metal on soil carrying in the quiet. My first thought was sabotage, another gas can, maybe, or something worse. I stepped forward, the shotgun raised but not aimed, and called out, "You're on private property. Drop the tool and stand up." The figure froze, their flashlight clattering to the ground. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then they bolted, sprinting toward the creek, their boots pounding the earth. "Rusty, stay," I shouted, not wanting him to chase into the dark. I ran after them, my bad knee screaming with every step, but they were fast, disappearing into the tall grass. By the time I reached the creek, they were gone, the only trace a splash in the water and a faint trail of bent reeds. I doubled back to the barn, my breath ragged, and checked the spot where they'd been digging. A small hole, maybe 6 inches deep, revealed a tangle of wires, part of the barn's old electrical system, long since disconnected. But next to it was something new, a plastic bag, half buried, containing a vial of clear liquid and a syringe. My skin crawled. Poison? Something to taint the soil? I didn't touch it, just snapped photos and called Carla. She arrived at 1:30 a.m., her cruiser's lights off to avoid attention. "You're making my night shifts interesting, Tom," she said, but her face was grim as she bagged the vial and syringe. "This looks like trouble. Could be anything: pesticide, toxin, even drugs. I'll get it to the lab." She studied the hole, the wires, the footprints. This wasn't random. They knew where to dig. "Margaret's people," I said, my voice flat. Carla didn't argue. "Maybe. But we need more than a blurry camera shot to pin it on her. Keep your cameras rolling, and don't go chasing anyone alone. You're lucky they didn't turn on you." She left, promising to rush the lab results, but her warning stuck with me. Lucky? I didn't feel lucky. I felt hunted. The next morning, I met Jenny Klein at the diner, a greasy spoon on Main Street with checkered floors and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s. Jenny was already there, sipping coffee, her notebook open. She was wiry, with sharp green eyes and a streak of purple in her hair. "Talk to me," she said, pen poised. I laid it all out, the 911 call, the creek, the letter, the barn. I showed her the photos, the footage, the HOA notice. Her eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas. "This is gold, Tom. Margaret's been dodging me for months, but this is a story. What's her deal?" I asked, stirring my coffee. Jenny leaned in. "She's a fixer. Back in Seattle, she cleaned up messes for big corporations, labor disputes, environmental violations. Never lost a case. Retired here, but retirement's not her style. Elise is her legacy. That foundation? It's a front. I've got sources saying they're funneling money to developers, not community projects. Your land's the last piece they need for a subdivision deal." My jaw tightened. "Daniels." Jenny nodded. "He's in deep. Campaign funds, private dinners at Margaret's house. But he's sloppy. I'm working on it." She promised to run a story by the weekend, focusing on the creek contamination and the HOA's overreach. "Stay safe, Tom," she said as we parted. Margaret doesn't like losing. I drove home, my mind churning. A subdivision. That's what this was about. Not some eco-dream, but profit. My land, with its creek and flat fields, was prime real estate. Margaret didn't just want to win. She wanted to cash in. Back at the house, I found another surprise, a flyer taped to my gate, identical to the HOA letter, but with a new line. Asterisk community meeting tonight to discuss the Brennan property. Your voice matters. Asterisk it was signed by Elise, her name in looping cursive. I went to the meeting, against my better judgment. The HOA clubhouse was a low brick building, packed with 50 neighbors, most of whom I knew by name. Margaret stood at the podium, her blazer pristine, her smile practiced. Elise was beside her, in a green dress, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. "We're here to protect Willow Creek," Margaret began, her voice smooth. "Mr. Brennan's property is a liability, unpermitted structures, environmental risks. We propose annexing it for the community's benefit." I stood at the back, arms crossed, as whispers rippled through the room. Some nodded. Others looked uneasy. Mrs. Callahan caught my eye, her lips tight. Then Elise spoke, her voice soft but calculated. "My foundation will build a community center on that land, with green energy and jobs for locals. Mr. Brennan's refusal is holding us back." A few clapped, but the room felt tense. I raised my hand. Margaret's smile faltered. "Let him speak," Mrs. Callahan called. I stepped forward, my boots loud on the linoleum. "This is my home," I said, my voice steady. "My family's been here since 1947. I've got the deed, the exemption, the proof. Margaret's lying to you. She poisoned my creek, sent people to my barn. This isn't about community. It's about money." The room erupted. Margaret banged the gavel, but people were shouting, some at her, some at me. Elise's face flushed, her eyes darting to her mother. I left before it got uglier, but as I reached my truck, I heard footsteps. Tim Lopez, the mechanic, jogged up. "I believe you, Tom," he said. "She tried to shut down my shop. I've got records. Let's talk." I nodded, a spark of hope flaring. The fight was on, and I wasn't alone. The next day, I woke to the smell of smoke. Not the comforting wood smoke of a neighbor's fireplace, but something sharper, acrid. Rusty was barking before I even opened my eyes, his paws scratching at the bedroom door. I threw on a shirt and boots, my heart pounding, and ran outside. The sky was clear, but a thin haze hung over the back pasture, near the barn. I sprinted across the yard, Rusty at my heels, and saw it. A smoldering pile of straw, and wood scraps, flames licking low but hungry, just feet from the barn's wall. I grabbed the hose from the spigot, my firefighter instincts kicking in. The water hit the fire with a hiss, steam rising in thick clouds. It wasn't a big blaze, not yet, but it could have been. The barn's wooden siding was scorched, the paint bubbling in black patches. I doused the pile until it was a sodden mess, my hands shaking with adrenaline. Rusty circled the area, sniffing, his growls sharp. The fire hadn't started itself. A trail of charred grass led to a plastic lighter, half melted, lying in the dirt. I bagged it, my jaw tight. Another gift from Margaret's crew. I called Carla, who arrived with a fire inspector, a grizzled man named Hank who'd worked with me years ago. He studied the scene, his face unreadable. "Accelerant," he said, sniffing the straw. "Kerosene, maybe." This was deliberate. He took samples, promising a report, but his eyes met mine. "You've got enemies, Tom. Watch your six." Carla added the lighter to the evidence pile, her expression dark. "I'm pushing the lab to rush that vial from the barn. If it's poison, we've got a felony on our hands." I spent the morning cleaning up, hauling the charred debris to a pit behind the house. My knee ached, the old injury flaring from the run, but I couldn't stop. The fire had been a warning, a step up from cut fences and tainted water. Margaret was getting bold, or desperate. I checked the cameras. The footage from 3:47 a.m. showed a figure, same hoodie, same broad build as the barn intruder, pouring liquid on the pile and striking a match. The face was hidden, but the boots were the same. I burned another USB and sent it to Carla. By afternoon, Jenny's story hit the local paper's website. Willow Creek land dispute turns toxic. It detailed the creek contamination, the HOA's threats, and my family's history with the land. She didn't name Margaret outright, legal caution, but the hints were clear. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors, some supportive, others wary. Tim Lopez stopped by, his pickup rattling up the drive. He handed me a folder. "Margaret's fines," he said. "She charged me for unapproved signage at my shop. I'm not even in the HOA. There's more like me, Tom. We're ready to talk." I thanked him, my hope growing. But that evening, another blow landed. A county health inspector, a nervous young guy named Greg, showed up with a clipboard. "We got a report of contaminated runoff from your property," he said, avoiding my eyes. "I need to test your soil and water." I stared, incredulous. Contaminated runoff? Someone poured gas in my creek. Greg shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. "Just following orders." Commissioner Daniels signed off on it. Daniels. Of course. I let Greg take his samples, but I followed him, snapping photos of every move. He left without a word, his van kicking up dust. I called Jenny, my voice tight. They're flipping the script, blaming me for their mess. She whistled. Classic Margaret. I'm digging into Daniel's finances. Give me a day. I hung up, my anger simmering into resolve. Margaret wanted to play dirty? I'd play smarter. That night, I met with Tim and Mrs. Callahan at her house, a cozy cottage overflowing with roses. Tim brought two others, Sarah, a single mom who'd been fined for her kid's lemonade stand, and Mike, a farmer who'd caught Ryan snooping in his fields. We shared stories, building a timeline of Margaret's tactics. Sarah had a recording of Margaret threatening to call child services over her son's unsupervised playtime. Mike had photos of Ryan's truck near his irrigation ditch. I shared the camera footage, the lighter, the vial. We go public, I said. Jenny's ready to run it. Mrs. Callahan nodded, her eyes fierce. My husband fought in Korea. He'd roll in his grave if he saw this nonsense. We're with you, Tom. We agreed to meet again, pooling evidence for Jenny. As I drove home, the moon high, I felt a shift. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. But when I pulled into my drive, my headlights caught something new, a sign hammered into the ground near my gate. Asterisk future site of Willow Future Community Center. Coming 2026. Asterisk Elise's foundation logo was plastered across it, her name in bold. I ripped it out, though it's splintering in my hands. Margaret wasn't just fighting. She was claiming victory before the war was over. I tossed the sign in the barn, my resolve hardening. Let her come. I was ready. The next morning, I woke to a text from Carla. Asterisk lab results are in. Vials of pesticide, banned in Idaho. Felony possession. We're pulling Ryan in for questioning. Asterisk my pulse quickened. This was big. If they could tie Ryan to Margaret, her whole operation might crumble. But I knew she'd wriggle out unless we had airtight proof. I called Jenny, who was already on it. I'm meeting a source today, she said. Says Daniels took a wire transfer from a shell company linked to Margaret. If I can confirm it, we've got her. I spent the day fortifying the homestead. New locks on the barn, motion sensor lights around the perimeter, and a second camera aimed at the creek. Rusty followed me, his energy high, like he sensed the storm coming. By noon, Nate dropped off a stack of flyers he'd printed. Asterisk protect Willow Creek. Stop the HOA land grab. Asterisk we plan to distribute them at the next town meeting, rallying non-HOA residents to fight the annexation. People are talking, Tom, Nate said. Your story's waking them up. But Margaret wasn't idle. That afternoon, a county zoning officer arrived, a smug man named Victor with a comb-over and a clipboard. We've received a petition to rezone your land for community use, he said, handing me a thick packet. The HOA claims your property is a public nuisance. You've got 10 days to respond. I skimmed the document, my blood boiling. It cited unpermitted structures, environmental hazards, and community complaints, all lies, backed by forged signatures. I recognized two names, neighbors who'd moved away years ago. Margaret was playing dirty, and she had help. I called Linda, the clerk from the health department, who'd quietly tipped me off about Daniels. Victor's in Margaret's pocket, she confirmed. He pushed through a rezoning for her last year, got a fat bonus after. Check the county records. You'll find holes. I spend hours online, digging through public files. Sure enough, Victor's name popped up on shady permits, all tied to Daniel's projects. I sent everything to Jenny, who texted back. Asterisk this is dynamite. Keep pushing. Asterisk. That evening, I found another flyer on my gate. This one worse. Asterisk dangerous squatter threatens Willow Creek. Join the HOA to save our future. Asterisk my face was on it. A grainy photo from the fair, my eyes half closed, making me look like a thug. Below was a call to vote for Elise as HOA president. I tore it down, but not before snapping a photo for Jenny. The lies were piling up, but so was my evidence. At midnight, the cameras buzzed again. I pulled up the feed, expecting Ryan or the hooded figure. Instead, it was Elise, alone, standing at the gate, a flashlight in one hand, a folder in the other. She looked nervous, her eyes darting. I hit the intercom. What do you want, Elise? She flinched, then held up the folder. I just want to talk, Tom. No tricks. Against my better judgment, I opened the gate, keeping Rusty close and the shotgun nearby. She stepped into the yard, her face pale under the floodlights. I know you think we're monsters, she said, her voice shaky. But this isn't what it looks like. Mom's intense, but she's doing this for me. For the community. I crossed my arms. Poisoning my creek? Burning my barn? That's for the community. Her eyes widened. I didn't know about that. Ryan, he's impulsive. I told him to stop. She handed me the folder. This is a buyout offer. It's generous, Tom. You could start over somewhere else. I didn't touch it. This is my home, Elise. You can't buy that. She bit her lip, tears welling. Mom won't stop. She never does. I'm trying to make this easier. For a moment, I saw a crack in her polished facade, fear, maybe guilt. But I didn't trust it. Take your offer and go, I said. She left, the folder on the ground, her flashlight bobbing as she disappeared. I didn't sleep. Elise's visit felt like a ploy, but her fear seemed real. Was she a pawn or a player? Either way, Margaret was tightening the noose. The rezoning petition, the flyers, the fire, they were all pieces of a bigger plan. I checked the cameras, saved the footage of Elise, and emailed it to Jenny. The fight was about to get uglier, and I needed every weapon I could get. Jenny's second story hit the next morning, a front-page bombshell. HOA power grab threatens historic homestead. It named Margaret and Elise, citing the creek contamination, the forged petition, and Daniel's shady deals. The online version included my camera footage, blurred but damning, and quotes from Tim and Mrs. Callahan. By noon, my phone was buzzing with messages from neighbors, some apologizing, others offering help. A local anti-HOA group shared the story on social media, and it went viral, racking up 10,000 views by evening. Margaret didn't take it lying down. She posted a rebuttal on the HOA's website, calling the story slander and me a violent recluse. She announced an emergency HOA meeting to address the misinformation and push the rezoning vote. But the tide was shifting. At the feed store, Nate said customers were refusing to buy from HOA members, and Tim's shop was packed with supporters. You're a folk hero, Tom, Nate grinned. I didn't feel like one. I felt tired, my knee throbbing, my nerves frayed from sleepless nights. That afternoon, Carla called. Ryan's in custody. He's not talking, but we matched his boots to the barn footage. The DA's building a case, arson, environmental violation, trespassing. Margaret's lawyering up, but she's rattled. I thanked her, but my relief was short-lived. When I checked the mail, I found a new letter from the county. Notice of eminent domain review. Margaret had escalated to the nuclear option, claiming my land was needed for public benefit. If approved, the county could force me to sell at a fraction of its value. I called Jenny, my voice shaking. They're trying to condemn my land. She cursed. That's desperate. Eminent domain's a long shot, but Daniels might push it through. We need a public outcry. She promised to run a follow-up, but warned me to brace for retaliation. She was right. That night, I woke to Rusty's frantic barking. The cameras showed 3 figures at the gate, spray painting squatter in red across the posts. I hit the panic button, and Carla's team arrived in minutes, catching one of the vandals, a kid from Elise's foundation. He confessed Margaret had paid him $200 to send a message. The arrest made the evening news, and Margaret's facade cracked. At the HOA meeting, only 20 people showed up, half the usual crowd. Mrs. Callahan and Tim crashed it, handing out Nate's flyers. When Margaret tried to speak, Sarah stood up, her voice trembling but clear. You threatened my son. You're not saving this community. You're tearing it apart. The room went silent. Elise, at the podium, looked like she might cry. Margaret stormed out, her heels clicking on the floor. I watched the live stream from home, my heart pounding. We were winning, but Margaret was cornered, and cornered animals were dangerous. I checked the cameras, locked the doors, and kept Rusty close. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The imminent domain notice hung over me like a storm cloud. I met with Linda, the health department clerk, who'd started helping off the record. She brought a stack of county records, her hands shaking as she handed them over. Daniels fast-tracked the review, she said. He's got a developer lined up, some LLC tied to Margaret. If they push this through, you'll have 30 days to sell or fight in court. I stared at the papers, my throat tight. Court could bankrupt me, and Margaret knew it. I called Jenny, who was digging into the LLC. It's a shell company, she said. Registered in Delaware, but the money trails back to Margaret's old firm in Seattle. She's been planning this for years. I felt a chill. This wasn't just about Willow Creek. Margaret had a playbook, and I was just the latest target. Jenny promised to expose the LLC in her next story, but warned, you need a lawyer, Tom. Now, I reached out to a friend, Mark, a retired attorney who'd owed me a favor since I pulled his kid from a car wreck in '98. He agreed to take the case pro bono, but his tone was grim. Eminent domain's a beast, he said. We can fight it, but we need public pressure and hard evidence. Keep gathering statements. I nodded, my resolve hardening. Mark filed an injunction to stall the review, buying us time. That afternoon, I met with Tim, Sarah, and Mike at Nate's store. We formed a coalition, calling ourselves the Willow Creek Defenders. Sarah designed a website, uploading our evidence, footage, records, Margaret's threats. Mike's teenage son, Ethan, a tech whiz, spread it on social media, using hashtags like #SaveWillowCreek and #StopHOAKaren. By evening, the site had 5,000 hits, and a national anti-HOA group offered legal support. But Margaret struck back. The next morning, I found my garden trashed, tomato plants uprooted, irrigation lines slashed. Rusty's water bowl was tipped over, a faint chemical smell lingering. I called Carla, who sent a deputy to collect samples. "This is personal," she said, her voice tight. "I'm pushing for a restraining order against Margaret and Elise." I nodded, but my heart sank. Rusty was fine, but the thought of them targeting him lit a fire in me I hadn't felt since my firefighting days. That evening, a betrayal hit. Greg, the health inspector, showed up with a new report claiming my soil tested positive for the same pesticide found in the barn. "You're facing fines," he said, his eyes darting. I stared, incredulous. "You know that's a lie. You took those samples yourself." He flushed, muttering about lab errors, and left. I called Linda, who confirmed my fear. Greg had been bribed. "He's got a new car," she said. "Paid cash last week." I sent the soil report to Mark, who added it to the injunction. Jenny ran a story exposing Greg's sudden wealth, linking it to Daniel's. The backlash was swift. Locals picketed the county office, demanding an investigation. But Margaret wasn't done. At midnight, my cameras caught her at the gate, alone, slipping a note through the slot. I retrieved it, my hands shaking. "Sell now, or you'll lose everything. This is your last warning." I saved it for Carla, my anger turning to steel. Margaret was unraveling, and I was ready to push back. The town meeting was chaos. Over 100 people packed the community center, a squat building with peeling paint and folding chairs. Nate and I handed out flyers, while Sarah and Ethan worked the crowd, sharing our website. Jenny was there, her camera crew filming as Margaret took the stage, her face a mask of calm. "The Brennan property is a danger," she said, her voice steady. "We're protecting Willow Creek's future." Elise stood beside her, silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. I stood up, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "She's lying. My land's been in my family for generations. She poisoned my creek, burned my barn, and now she's bribing officials to steal it." I held up the eminent domain notice, the forged petition, the note from last night. The room exploded, some cheering, others shouting at Margaret. She banged the gavel, but it was no use. Mrs. Callahan stood, her voice trembling. "You find me for my roses. You're a bully, Margaret." Tim followed, then Mike, each sharing their story. Margaret's composure cracked. "This is a witch hunt," she screamed, her face red. Elise grabbed her arm, whispering, but Margaret shook her off. The crowd turned, booing as she stormed out. Elise stayed, tears streaming, and for a moment, I felt a pang of pity. But pity wouldn't save my land. Jenny's footage aired that night, a national network picking it up. #SaveWillowCreek trended, and donations poured into our legal fund. Mark called, ecstatic. "The injunction's holding. We've got a hearing in 2 weeks. Keep the pressure on." But Margaret retaliated. The next morning, I found Rusty limping, a thorn in his paw. It wasn't a thorn, it was a needle, laced with sedative. I rushed him to the vet, my heart in my throat. He'd be okay, but the message was clear. Margaret was targeting my family. Carla got the restraining order approved, barring Margaret and Elise from my property. Ryan was charged with arson and pesticide possession, his bail set high. But Margaret was untouchable, her lawyers stalling every move. I doubled the cameras, added floodlights, and slept with the shotgun loaded. The fight was personal now, and I wasn't backing down. The hearing loomed, a make-or-break moment. Mark prepped me for court, drilling me on the deed, the exemption, the evidence. "Margaret's team will paint you as a loner," he warned. "Stay calm, stick to the facts." I nodded, but my nerves were shot. Rusty was recovering, but the needle incident had shaken me. I saw Margaret's hand in every shadow, every creak of the house. Jenny's final story dropped the day before the hearing: corruption in Willow Creek. HOA leaders' ties to developer exposed. It linked Margaret's LLC to Daniel's campaign funds, with bank records and emails. The backlash was immediate. Daniels resigned, citing personal reasons, and the county paused the eminent domain review. Protesters swarmed Margaret's house, chanting no HOA land grab. Her HOA presidency was crumbling, but she wasn't done. The night before the hearing, my cameras caught a new figure at the creek, dumping barrels of liquid. I called Carla, who arrested the man on the spot, a hired hand from Margaret's old firm. The barrels contained industrial cleaner, meant to taint my water and frame me for pollution. The arrest made national news, and Margaret's lawyers scrambled. Elise, meanwhile, vanished, rumors swirling she'd left town. At the hearing, I took the stand, my voice steady as I laid out the truth, my family's history, Margaret's crimes, the community's fight. Mark presented our evidence. Footage, records, witness statements. Margaret's lawyer tried to spin it, claiming I'd fabricated the attacks, but the judge wasn't buying it. The room was packed with supporters, their cheers drowning out Margaret's objections. The judge ruled in my favor, dismissing the eminent domain claim and ordering an investigation into the HOA. Margaret was fined for frivolous litigation, her reputation in tatters. She left the courtroom in silence, her blazer wrinkled, her eyes hollow. I stepped outside, the sun warm on my face, and saw Mrs. Callahan, Tim, Sarah, and Nate waiting. They hugged me, Rusty wagging his tail at my side. The weeks after the hearing were quiet, but the scars remained. I rebuilt the garden, repaired the barn, and tested the creek daily until the water ran clean. Margaret moved away, her house listed for sale, her HOA badge revoked. Elise resurfaced in Portland, running a new nonprofit, but without her mother's shadow. Ryan pleaded guilty, serving 6 months, while the hired hand turned state's evidence, implicating Margaret in the barrel scheme. The Willow Creek Defenders became a permanent group, advocating for property rights. Jenny won an award for her reporting, and Nate's store became a hub for anti-HOA rallies. I framed the judge's ruling, hanging it beside my grandfather's deed. Rusty, fully healed, became a local celebrity, his photo on #SaveWillowCreek merch. But I wasn't the same. The fight had aged me, my knee worse, my sleep fitful. I'd won, but the cost was high trust, peace, the innocence of Willow Creek. Still, I'd kept my home, my family's legacy. That was enough. One evening, Mrs. Callahan brought a casserole, her roses blooming behind her. "You did good, Tom," she said. I smiled, the first real one in months. "We did good," I corrected. She nodded, and we sat on the porch, Rusty at our feet, watching the sunset paint the fields gold. The war was over, but Willow Creek was forever changed. A year later, Willow Creek was thriving. The HOA reformed, its new board transparent and fair. The Defenders hosted a festival celebrating the land's history, with music, food, and tours of my homestead. Jenny's book, The Willow Creek War, was a bestseller, and I gave talks at property rights conferences, Rusty always at my side. I built a new fence, stronger than before, and planted a row of willows along the creek, their roots anchoring the soil. The barn got a fresh coat of paint, the scorch marks gone. Neighbors stopped by often, bringing pies or just stories, their trust in me a quiet victory. One morning, I found a letter in the mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single page, typed, from Elise. "I'm sorry, Tom. I was wrong. Mom's gone, and I'm trying to be better." I read it twice, then tucked it away. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but I'd learned to let go of the fire inside me. That night, I sat on the porch, Rusty snoring beside me. The stars were bright, the creek singing softly. Willow Theses had been a war, but it had forged something stronger, a community, a legacy, a home. Margaret had tried to break me, but she'd only made me fight harder. And in the end, Willow Creek was mine, not because I owned it, but because I loved it.